Today, we're diving into a fascinating story, a civil war that's happening inside your body at this very moment. And it's all about the one thing you absolutely can't live without: oxygen. I know, it sounds a little out there, right? But this is a central question in biology. The very same process that gives us the energy to move, to think, to live, well, it also creates these byproducts that slowly but surely break us down. So how on earth does that work? Let's get into it.
To really understand this internal conflict, we first have to meet the culprits. Let's introduce the microscopic agents of chaos that are right at the heart of this paradox.
They're called reactive oxygen species, or you'll hear me say this a lot, ROS for short. Now, think of your cell's power plants, the mitochondria. Every single time they burn oxygen for fuel, they produce this kind of, well, toxic exhaust. The thing is, these aren't some foreign invaders. They're created by the very process that keeps us alive.
You might be thinking, this cellular exhaust is just pouring out all the time, but our bodies are incredibly efficient. In reality, only a tiny, tiny fraction of electrons, somewhere between 0.1% and 2%, actually escape and go rogue, creating these damaging ROS molecules. But here's the catch. Over an entire lifetime, that tiny, persistent leak really adds up. It's kind of like a slow, steady drip that eventually erodes solid stone. This one small inefficiency has absolutely massive, cumulative consequences for our cells and for our health. So, how are these damaging molecules actually made? To get that, we need to zoom way in on the chemistry and see exactly how the most dangerous of these radicals is forged deep inside our cells. Of all the different types of ROS, one stands out as the main villain of our story: the hydroxyl radical. This thing is so reactive that it literally only exists for nanoseconds. It just attacks the very first molecule it bumps into, causing immediate damage. It's a tiny, indiscriminate wrecking ball. So how is this molecular wrecking ball actually made? It's not a simple one-step thing. It requires a very specific two-step chemical reaction to come into existence. It's called the Haber-Weiss reaction. So in step one, a less dangerous radical kind of primes the weapon by making an iron ion much more reactive. But step two, that's the critical blow. This is the Fenton reaction, where that now reactive iron collides with hydrogen peroxide, which is a really common molecule in our cells, and forges that nasty hydroxyl radical. That's the exact moment our molecular wrecking ball is created. And this is a great example of how science is always evolving. For years, scientists credited the entire Haber-Weiss reaction. But we now know the real toxicity, the real danger, comes from that second step, the Fenton reaction. It's basically the trigger pull in this whole chemical process. Okay, so now we know who the culprit is and how it's made. So let's look at the damage it causes. What happens when these hydroxyl radicals are let loose in our cells? Well, their first target is the most important molecule of all, our DNA. ROS basically wages a war on three fronts. It attacks our genetic blueprint in our DNA, the actual walls of our cells in lipids, and the little molecular machines that do all the work, our proteins. Let's start with the attack on our core instruction manual. So, on the one hand, you have guanine, one of the four essential building blocks of our DNA. It's clean, stable. Then you've got what's left after a hydroxyl radical attacks it. This new molecule, 8-oxo-G, is like a typo in our genetic code. It causes our cellular machinery to completely misread the instructions. And those typos? Oh, they are definitely not harmless. This kind of damage can lead to a whole cascade of failures, mutations, errors when we're trying to build proteins, and it can even trigger a cell's self-destruct sequence. Over time, this becomes a key factor in the development of cancer and other serious diseases. All right, next up in this cellular war is the assault on our cell membranes, the very walls that are supposed to protect our cells from the outside world. This process is called lipid peroxidation. The hydroxyl radical attacks the fats or lipids that make up our cell membranes. And here's the thing, it's not a one-time hit. It sets off a chain reaction, spreading damage from one lipid to the next, a lot like rust spreading across a piece of metal and weakening its entire structure. And what's worse, this rusting process actually creates its own toxic byproducts, like the molecule you see here, MDA. This new molecule then becomes a second wave of assault, damaging proteins and even circling all the way back to attack our DNA again. It's just a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle of destruction. So we've seen all the microscopic damage. Now let's zoom out and connect these tiny molecular battles to the bigger picture, the universal human experience of aging and age-related disease. The cumulative effect of all this damage, which we call oxidative stress, is now understood to be a major factor in so many neurodegenerative diseases. This constant low-grade warfare inside our neurons is directly linked to the progression of conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS. So the crucial takeaway here is this. Aging isn't just about the passage of time. On a biological level, it's about the accumulation of these tiny molecular scars. Every single second, millions of these little battles are won and lost inside you, and the accumulated damage is what we actually perceive as aging. And that brings us right back to where we started, the great paradox of oxygen. It's the molecule that makes complex life possible, right? It's the fuel for our fire. But that very same fire produces the sparks and smoke that slowly but inevitably wear down the entire engine. You see, this isn't a battle we can ever really win, because it's a byproduct of just being alive. So it leaves us with a final, really fascinating question. If this cellular civil war is simply the price of admission for life, what does that change about how we think about health, longevity, and the very nature of aging itself?